Picture a woman, Victorian England, 1863. She's walking down a London street on a Tuesday morning in October, and she looks absolutely immaculate. Her dress is a deep burgundy silk, the colour of old wine. Her hair is swept up perfectly under a bonnet trimmed with dark ribbon. Her gloves are white, actually white, spotlessly white, which is already a miracle considering where she's walking. She moves through the crowd the way the wealthy move through crowds everywhere and in every era. Like the crowd is something that happens to other people. Her back is perfectly straight. Her chin is up. She radiates cleanliness, order, moral superiority. Now, come closer. No, closer than that. Get down on your hands and knees if you have to, because what I'm about to show you is on the ground. Specifically, the last 2 inches of her skirt, the hem. The part that actually touches the world. That hem is dragging, not trailing delicately, not brushing the cobblestones with a whisper of silk. Dragging, ploughing through a street that, in 1863, is home to approximately 300,000 horses that collectively produce about 1,000 tons of manure every single day. A street where the gutters run with liquid that starts as rainwater and ends as something considerably worse. A street where a pig you passed 3 corners back was doing what pigs do freely and without embarrassment. A street where a dog has been dead near the ironmonger's for what looks like 3 days. A street where vegetable matter in various stages of decomposition has been pushed to the sides, which means it now lines the exact path that hem is travelling. That hem, by the end of a Tuesday afternoon walk, will weigh more than it did this morning. Not metaphorically, literally. The filth of London will have wickered up into the fabric fibre by fibre, and the woman wearing this dress will hand it to a maid tonight who will know, from the weight and the smell and the particular colour of the mud, exactly which streets her mistress walked down and in roughly what order. She is immaculate. She's also dragging the city behind her. Welcome to Victorian womanhood. I make these history stories, and honestly, most of the time when people write to me they say they fell asleep somewhere around the 2nd hour of a story about Georgian trade routes. But this one, I suspect, you might stay awake for. Because the thing about the hidden layer of filth under every Victorian woman's skirt is that it is simultaneously disgusting, fascinating, tragic, and a perfect metaphor for an entire civilization that decided that as long as no one talked about something, it simply did not exist. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The room you wake up in is not the room you would have chosen. It is the attic. It is November 1863, and you have been in this attic for 3 months now, sleeping on a narrow iron frame bed with a mattress that has a valley in the middle from all the girls who slept in it before you. There is one small window that faces a brick wall, which means the light that comes through it is already second-hand, already grey and exhausted before it reaches you. There is a basin for washing, which is ceramic with a hairline crack that has been repaired so many times the repair is older than the crack itself. There is the particular smell of a room that is cold at night and never quite warm enough in the day. Damp wool, the faint sourness of old straw from the mattress, the breath of 2 other girls sleeping near enough to hear. There are 2 other beds in this room. They belong to Agnes, the kitchen maid, who is 17 and from Shropshire and sleeps like the dead, and to Patience, the housemaid, who is 23 from somewhere in Kent, and snores with the dedication of a woman who has decided that sleep is the one area of her life where she refuses to perform. You're 16. You're from Dorset, a village so small that London still does not feel quite real to you. more like a dream someone else is having, and you are somehow trapped inside it. Your name is Mary, Mary Bassett, daughter of a farm labourer who wrote 3 letters to get you this position. Lady's maid, second household of Sir Gerald Ashmore, 14 Harrington Gardens, Kensington. You arrived in August with a small trunk, a letter of reference from the vicar's wife, and a terror so complete that your hands didn't stop shaking for the entire first week. The terror has settled now into something more manageable, not confidence, not comfort, something more like learned acceptance that this is where you are, and this is what you do, and you will survive it, or you will not. The bell rings at 5:30, not a gentle bell. This is the sort of bell that sounds like someone has dropped a metal bucket onto a flagstone floor and then picked it up and dropped it again just to be sure you understood. It is the bell on the servants' board downstairs, the one labelled Lady's Maid, which means your mistress wants her morning tray, which means you have 6 minutes to be presentable and in her dressing room. You don't need an alarm. Your body has learned the bell schedule, has internalised it the way it once internalised the sounds of the farm. You're awake before it rings. You've been awake for some time, actually, lying in the dark, listening to patients snore and thinking about nothing in particular except the cold. The cold is considerable. November in an attic with a single glazed window, and no fire is November in an attic with a single glazed window and no fire. The servants don't get fires. That's not how this works. The fires are for the family, and for the drawing room, and for the dining room, and for the master's study, and for the mistress's sitting room and bedroom. The kitchen is warm because the range never goes out. But up here, you have your breath, which you can see. You have your flannel nightgown. You have the woolen blanket that the house provides, which is thin enough to read through if the light were better. You have a shawl draped over the blanket, and underneath the whole arrangement, fully clothed, you have Agnes beside you, who will not wake for another 15 minutes and who radiates heat like a small furnace. You do not have Agnes's warmth. You have your own narrow strip of mattress and your own thin blanket, and the certainty that the floor is going to be cold when you put your feet on it. You put your feet on it. It is very cold. The basin water has a skim of ice on it, which you break with 2 fingers. The sound is a small crystalline crack, and the pieces drift and spin. You splash your face, which is a small violence to commit on yourself so early in the morning, but a necessary one. The cold water hits your cheeks and your forehead and behind your ears, and the sleep recedes immediately, completely, like a tide going out all at once. You're awake. You're definitely awake. Your own clothes are simple by the standards of this house. A plain cotton chemise, flannel petticoat, just one, because you need to move quickly, and your working life doesn't require the performance of femininity that your mistress's does. A plain wool dress, dark navy, which can absorb a certain amount of the day's work without showing it. A white apron over that. Your cap, which is the badge of your station, and which you pin with the automatic precision of someone who has done it 1,000 times, your fingers moving in the dark without looking, because you have done it enough times to do it without light. 7 layers total by count, and you are the maid. The woman upstairs is going to put on considerably more. That's the thing nobody tells you when you take a position as a lady's maid. The physical reality of women's clothing in 1863 is not a simple thing. It is not put on a dress and go about your day. It is a construction project. It is an architectural undertaking. It is, on certain formal occasions, closer to building a medium-sized structure than to getting dressed. And you, Mary Bassett of Dorset, are the builder. You take your tray from the kitchen and climb the back stairs. The back stairs in a house like this are not the stairs, they are the other stairs. The narrow, unlit, utilitarian stairs that connect the servant's world to the family's world, without the two ever having to acknowledge each other. You know every creak of these stairs by now. Third from the bottom, fourth from the top. You step over them automatically in the dark, the tray held level, the teacup not moving. Mrs. Ashmore's room is on the first floor. You don't call her that to her face, by the way. She is Mrs. Ashmore. She is Lady Ashmore, technically, though in practice she seems to prefer Mrs. Ashmore, which is either modesty or a complicated statement about her relationship with her husband's title, and not your place to wonder about. To the other servants, she is the mistress. To you, alone in the attic room and in your own head, she is Mrs. Hartley, which was her name before she married, and which feels somehow more real than the title. You tap on the door, 1, 2, the agreed signal. Come. You enter. The room is warm. This is the first thing. After the attic, after the back stairs, after the perpetual November cold of everywhere in this house that isn't a family room, the warmth of Mrs. Ashmore's bedroom is a physical fact you feel in your lungs before you feel it on your skin. The fire has been burning since 5, when patients came up with coal. It crackles now with the confident warmth of a fire that knows it will be kept going all day, a sound like paper crumpling slowly, rhythmic and low. The second thing is the smell. Not unpleasant, or not exactly. It is a room smell, a particular and specific smell compounded of several elements. The faint sweetness of the wood fire, the cold cream your mistress applies every night to her face and hands, a trace of the lavender sachets in her wardrobe, the particular smell of money, which is difficult to describe but which you are learning to recognize as a combination of beeswax on furniture, good soap used without rationing, and the absence of the cheaper smells that permeate the rest of your life. And underneath all of that, the human smell, not strong, not offensive, but present. Because Mrs. Ashmore is a person, and persons have a smell, and the elaborate performance of Victorian femininity has not yet figured out how to eliminate the basic biological fact of the human body. It will try, though. You will spend most of today helping it try. Mary. Good morning, Ma'am. She's sitting up in bed, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the structure of her daytime appearance, she looks different. Younger, maybe, or just more ordinary. More like a person who exists in 3 dimensions rather than a portrait. She is 31 years old. She's been married for 9 years. She has 3 children, 2 boys at school and a girl of 4 who is currently being managed by the nursemaid 2 floors up. She's not, by the standards of her circle, especially beautiful or especially interesting, but she is well dressed, which in 1863 is a form of beauty and a form of intelligence both, because the kind of well-dressed that passes muster in Kensington in 1863 requires both an excellent eye and a considerable education. You've been hired to help maintain that excellence. You pour her tea and put the tray on the side table. She wraps both hands around the cup. You move to the fire and add coal, feeling the heat of it on your face as you lean forward, the tongs warm in your grip. You wait. This is the ritual. You're good at rituals now. The dressing begins at 7:30. 2 hours from now, Mrs. Ashmore will descend for breakfast, and she will look the way women of her station are required to look at all times, composed, orderly, as if this is the natural state of things rather than the result of 2 hours of labour. The labour is the thing that must never be visible. The labour is the thing that you do. You start with the chemise, linen, which is her preference, not cotton. Cotton is for poorer women, and for underneath the linen, and you know this the way you know the order of the planets, because it has been repeated to you by Mrs. Ashmore herself, with the patient certainty of someone explaining a fact of nature rather than a social convention. The linen chemise is loose, reaching to her knees, with a gathered neckline and sleeves that fall to the elbow. It has been washed and pressed, and it smells of the laundry, lye soap and iron starch, and the faint outdoor smell of having dried in the yard behind the house. You hold it out, she lifts her arms, and the linen settles onto her skin with the slight crispness of a freshly pressed garment making first contact. The chemise is layer 1. Layer 2 is the stays. They call them stays in this house, though you've heard the word corset, which is the French word, which somehow implies a certain kind of woman. Stay sounds more English, more practical, more like something a sensible person might choose freely, rather than something imposed. Neither word captures the reality of the object. You have thought about this object a great deal in the 3 months you have been helping Mrs. Ashmore into it every morning and out of it every night. It is a piece of engineering. That is not an exaggeration. It is shaped from several dozen pieces of fabric, interlaced with boning, which in this case means whalebone, actual baleen from the mouth of an actual whale that died in an ocean you have never seen, shipped to England, cut into strips, and inserted into channels sewn into the garment so that they run vertically from waist to hip and vertically from waist to breast. The stays themselves come to a point at the front called the busk, which is a stiff placket of steel or bone that runs down the centre front. She has a newer pair with a hinged front busk, which means the stays actually open at the front as well as lacing at the back, and this is apparently a recent innovation that has changed the lives of women throughout England, which gives you some indication of what lacing the back was like before. She stands in front of the glass, hands resting lightly on the dressing table. You pick up the stays. They are still warm from where they were placed near the fire to heat. Cold stays are rigid and difficult. Warmed slightly, they are merely rigid and difficult, but also unpleasant in a different way. You hold them around her from behind, aligning the front busk with the centre of her body. She reaches down and clicks the clasp that secures the front. Now you take the laces. The lacing of a corset, when done correctly, takes approximately 10 minutes and considerable strength. You've developed muscles in your forearms and hands in the 3 months since you started this job that you did not have before. Your left hand holds the stay against her body. Your right hand pulls. One section of lacing, tightened, redistributed, evened. Another section. Another. Slowly, centimetre by centimetre, the distance between the two lacing sections at the back narrows, and Mrs. Ashmore's waist begins its daily transformation. Her natural waist at rest is approximately 24 inches. She knows this. You know this, though neither of you has discussed it because women do not discuss their own measurements, except in the privacy of a dressmaker's fitting. When fully laced, she achieves approximately 21 inches, 3 inches smaller than the body God gave her, relocated upward and downward, redistributed into her chest and her hips, creating the silhouette that 1863 considers not only fashionable, but essentially correct, essentially how a woman should appear. The process of achieving this requires you to pull with your full body weight. She exhales. You pull. Her ribs move under her skin, not breaking, not quite, but compressing, the lower floating ribs surrendering their position, and folding inward to accommodate the narrowing. This is not something she experiences as pain exactly. It is something she's been experiencing since she was 14 or 15, when she was first laced as a young woman being prepared for society. The body is adaptable. It has adapted. It has learned to work within different parameters. Whether that adaptation is a choice or a surrender depends on who you ask, and the people who have opinions on the subject are not the people wearing the stays. She watches herself in the glass. "A little more," she says. You pull a little more. Done. You tie the laces, tuck the ends. She squares her shoulders and the transformation is immediate. The slump she allows herself only in private, only before you, is gone. She is upright, perfectly upright, more upright than is entirely natural, because the boning will not permit otherwise. She breathes, carefully. A Victorian woman in full dress takes approximately 45% of the breath a human being at rest would take. This is not something anyone has measured in 1863. No one will bother measuring it for several more decades, when a French doctor named Ludovico Followell will conduct studies on the effects of corsetry and publish results that polite society will find extremely inconvenient. Right now, it is simply what breathing is for women who wear stays. You breathe to the depth the stays permit. If you need more, you don't get it. You learn to want less. Layer 3. The drawers. This is the garment that will confuse anyone who picks up a Victorian novel and wonders why there is never any mention of anyone going to the bathroom, or at least never any embarrassing incident involving the difficulty of doing so while wearing 17 pounds of clothing. The drawers are not a single piece of fabric with a closed crotch. They are two separate legs, connected at the waistband, open in the middle. The technical term ladies use when they must mention them at all is open drawers, and the practical reason for this design is that in a world where a woman might have 4, 5 or 6 skirts layered over her at any given time, a closed crotch is a piece of engineering that works against you in the moments when engineering is most urgently required. You help her into them. They are cotton today, the everyday pair. Linen drawers are for visiting, for occasions. Cotton is for Tuesday morning at home. Already at layer 3 and you haven't reached a single piece of clothing that any passer-by on the street could identify as part of her outfit. I want you to hold this in your mind. Everything described so far, the chemise, the stays, the drawers, are invisible. Not metaphorically invisible. Actually invisible. They exist under the other things. They are the foundation of the construction. They are the reason the visible parts of her appearance look the way they do. And they are also the parts that will accumulate the majority of the day's biological reality. The sweat from her body, which cannot reach the outer garments because the undergarments intercept it. The smell that begins on a body that is laced tightly and cannot breathe properly within approximately 3 hours of dressing. The evidence of every physical thing that her body does regardless of what her social class requires it to pretend not to do. By the end of the day, these garments will need to be laundered. We'll come back to that. Layer 4 is the crinoline, and here is where things get architecturally significant. The crinoline cage has been part of women's fashion since approximately 1856. Before that, the fullness of skirts was achieved by petticoats alone. Multiple layers of horsehair stiffened cotton or flannel, worn one on top of another, sometimes 5 or 6 deep, weighing in total somewhere between 12 and 15 pounds, all of which had to be washed and restarched regularly, and which caused, according to several American physicians who studied the problem, a variety of spinal conditions in middle-class women between the ages of 20 and 40. Someone decided this was inefficient and solved the problem with a wire cage. The cage crinoline is, when you hold it in your hands, a genuinely astonishing thing. It is made of steel hoops, graduated in size from small at the top to large at the bottom, connected by vertical tapes. When compressed, it can fold. When released, it springs open into a circle roughly 6 feet in diameter. It weighs perhaps 2 pounds. 2 pounds versus 15. In terms of pure mechanical efficiency, this was an improvement. In terms of actual practical experience, what it created was a woman who is, at all times, surrounded by a circle of occupied space approximately 6 feet across. A woman who cannot sit directly next to anyone without her skirts either collapsing and shooting upward or pushing the person next to her off whatever they are both sitting on. A woman who, when she walks through a doorway, must navigate mathematically. A woman who cannot reach something directly in front of her without bending at an angle that the stays will not easily accommodate. A woman who, when she sits in a chair, has a specific and complicated relationship with the geometry of sitting in a chair. A woman who, if she stands too close to a candle, a fireplace, a lamp or any other open flame, may discover that the cage she is wearing holds her skirts away from her body with approximately 6 inches of air between the fabric and herself, and that this air column, when heated, becomes a chimney draught of considerable violence. We'll come back to that. You hold the cage open for her, she steps into it. You fasten the waistband. The cage drops into its natural shape around her. This great bell of wire and steel, absurd looking when you consider it as a piece of clothing, which it is, and magnificent looking when you consider it as the skeleton of a silhouette, which it also is. The metalwork catches the firelight as it settles. Mrs. Ashmore does not look at it. She looks at herself above it, the stays, the chemise, the composed face in the glass. The cage below her waist is simply infrastructure. It will become invisible under the layers, the first petticoat over the cage, cotton with a wide flounce at the bottom, white, which serves the function of keeping the cage's steel hoops from pressing through the outer fabric and creating ridges. The cage is hidden now. The second petticoat is flannel, because November is cold even in a heated house. And in a house where warmth is not consistently reliable, the flannel layer matters. You feel the warmth of it against your hands as you adjust the waistband. Now the dress itself. It is a morning dress, which in 1863 means a dress intended for activities that occur before calling hours begin at noon, which include receiving the household's accounts from Mrs. Walsh the housekeeper, writing correspondence, seeing the dressmaker if one is coming, and being visible to the children at whatever hour the nursemaid brings them down. It is still silk because a woman of Mrs. Ashmore's position does not wear wool before she has been called a practical person, which is a particular kind of insult in this social world. The silk is a dark green, the colour of holly leaves, with a slight sheen. The skirt is the appropriate width for 1863, which means very wide, which means the cage underneath fills it to exactly the right circumference, and the effect is of a woman who is moving through the world surrounded by a considerable and orderly sea of dark green. You fasten the back, 32 buttons, each one a small hook and loop closure, 32 of them. You have done this so many times now that your fingers move automatically, the way a musician's fingers move on a known scale, the small brass hooks finding their loops without needing your eyes. She is not watching you do this. She is watching her own face in the glass, studying it with the particular attention of someone preparing a presentation. The amber necklace, I think. Yes, ma'am. You retrieve the amber necklace from its box. You fasten it at the back of her neck, your fingertips briefly touching the skin at the nape, which is always cooler than her hands. She watches you fasten it, and now the hair. Hair is its own education, and the one that took you longest to master. It is also the one that Mrs. Ashmore cares most about, which is logical when you consider that a woman of her station, in her world, has no control over her own face and very limited control over her own body. But hair is a medium that can be worked, shaped, arranged, deployed. Hair communicates. The arrangement of her hair tells anyone who looks at it what kind of woman she is, what time of day it is, what social context she's operating in, and whether her lady's maid is competent. You have been practicing on yourself in the evenings, in the attic, using a borrowed manual and whatever hairpins Agnes hasn't lost. Her hair is brown, thick, not quite straight, but not quite curly. You brush it first, which requires both hands and considerable patience, because Victorian hair care involves a great deal of oil and a great deal of brush, and the result is hair that is deeply conditioned and slightly tacky to the touch, which is either a problem or a feature depending on how you look at it, because the oil is what makes the elaborate arrangement stay put. You divide it, section it, twist, pin. There is a hairpiece, a small pad of false hair that adds volume to the arrangement at the back, which is where 1863 wants volume. You work the false piece into the real hair, making them indistinguishable. More pins, a curl at each temple, created with the hot tongs that you've been heating at the fire for the last 20 minutes. The tongs are iron, simple, and their temperature you gauge by holding them near your cheek and feeling the radiant heat. Not touching. Feeling. Too hot and you burn the hair, which produces a smell that never quite leaves the room and a texture that never quite recovers. You've learned by doing. You've done this now many times. The smell of hot metal near hair. The small hiss when the iron is right and the curl forms cleanly around it. She watches. You watch her watching. Done. She turns her head, examines the arrangement from both sides. You wait. This is the moment when adjustments happen or don't happen. Sometimes she says nothing, which means she is satisfied. Sometimes she says just there and touches a section, and you understand what needs moving. Today, she says nothing. The absence of criticism is as close to praise as you generally get. Mrs. Ashmore descends to breakfast at 8:30. You don't see her go. By the time she's walking down the main staircase with the particular weightless authority of a woman who is perfectly composed, you're already back in her room, making her bed, airing her nightgown, emptying the washing basin, replacing the coal in the scuttle. The room needs to be ready for her return whenever that is, and while she's away from it, it is yours in a particular way. Not to inhabit, never to inhabit, but to manage, to maintain, to keep as the stage set requires. You strip the bed. The sheets need airing, not washing, not today. In this house, the bed linens are changed weekly, which is more often than in many houses, because Mrs. Ashmore has specific views on cleanliness, views she has communicated to you through Mrs. Walsh, in the form of a list of requirements that was waiting for you when you arrived. The list is 7 points long. You have memorized it. Point 3. Bed linens aired daily, changed entirely every Monday. Point 4. The washing basin water to be changed twice daily, morning and evening. Point 5. All clothing worn directly against the skin to be removed for washing after no more than 3 days' wear. Point 6. Outer garments to be brushed and aired after each use. You are in a household that is by Victorian standards unusually committed to cleanliness, the mechanism of that cleanliness. You are the person who actually performs the acts that keep this woman, in her estimation, and in the estimation of everyone who meets her, clean. This requires a more extensive familiarity with the reality of her physical existence than either of you would probably prefer. Mrs. Walsh has given you a note and a small leather purse with money in it, and instructions to fetch 2 cards of black velvet ribbon, and a half-yard of the narrow cotton lace that Mrs. Ashmore uses for collar trim. The draper's is on the Fulham Road, which is 10 minutes' walk from this house if you walk briskly, which you intend to do because it is November, and the intention of walking briskly is the only thing standing between you and being cold for the entire duration of the errand. You wrap yourself in your cloak. This is not a fine cloak. It is wool, dark grey, serviceable, and is the cloak you came to London with, and will presumably be the cloak you wear until it can no longer be called cloak in good conscience. Under the cloak your working dress, under that your flannel petticoat, under that your chemise, under that your own simple cotton stays, not as tight as Mrs. Ashmore's, not even close, but present. Because a woman without stays in 1863 is either ill or has made a political statement, and you are neither. You're reasonably well insulated from the cold. And then you step outside. The smell is the first thing. It always is. The smell of London in November 1863 is something that writers of the period spend a great deal of ink trying to describe and almost always fail to capture, because the failure mode of description is to make it picturesque, which is a lie. There is nothing picturesque about it. It is the smell of 500,000 people and 250,000 horses living in a relatively small area without adequate sanitation, a smell compounded in November by coal smoke, which at this hour of the morning is at peak production, because every household in this part of London has its fires going, and the smoke is barely rising in the cold, damp air, just sitting above the rooftops like a personal weather system that the city has generated for itself. Under the coal smoke, horse, the dominant mammalian smell of the 19th century. You don't notice it after a while, which is something people always say about unpleasant smells, and which is sort of true and sort of the most alarming thing you could say, because it means that the baseline of what normal smells like has shifted without your noticing. Under the horse, mud. Not mud in the pure sense. Mud compounded with things that end up in the street, which is the polite way of describing a substance that is, in reality, a mixture of horse waste, ash from the fires, organic matter in decomposition, water, clay soil, and whatever was dropped, discarded or disposed of by the residents of these streets. The street outside 14 Harrington Gardens is a relatively good street. It is wide. It is, in theory, regularly swept by the crossing sweeper, who operates at the corner and who earns his living by keeping a path clear for pedestrians in exchange for occasional coins from people like you. The cobblestones are relatively even. The gutters are functioning and still. You put your foot onto the pavement and feel through the sole of your boot the slight give of it. The cobblestones are clean in the centres, where boots have been walking, where carriage wheels have pressed, but at the edges, in the corners, along the curbs, the material accumulates. A dark mat of it, compacted by use, slowly building. Now look down. Look at your own hem. Your working dress has a hem that falls approximately 2 inches above the ground. This is a concession to practicality that Mrs. Ashmore permits for outdoor errands, because she has, to her credit, some understanding of the reality of London streets, even if her own formal dresses do not reflect it. 2 inches of clearance, enough most of the time on most streets. Your cloak hangs slightly lower, maybe an inch from the ground. By the time you return from the drapers, both will tell the story of where you've been. You step over the crossing sweeper's territory, drop a halfpenny in his direction, and turn onto the larger road. And here you need to understand something about what walking in London in 1863 actually involves, because I think there is a version of this story where I describe it gently, and you imagine a charming scene from a period drama. Women in beautiful dresses navigating a colourful busy street. Perhaps a pause to look in a shop window. Perhaps a brief exchange with a friendly vendor. That is not walking in London in 1863. Walking in London in 1863 is navigation. It is a continuous set of micro-decisions made under pressure in a space that is not organised for pedestrian comfort, that is not even organised primarily for humans, and that at any given moment contains approximately 6 different categories of things that will make your day worse if you interact with them. The horses are the primary fact. There are on this stretch of road at this hour approximately 40 horses that you can see, and this is a moderate morning. Horses pulling omnibuses, horses pulling private carriages, horses pulling commercial wagons loaded with barrels or crates, or the enormous leather cases that contain things being delivered to the houses of the wealthy. The horses are not small, they're not decorative, they are working animals under pressure, and their drivers are men with jobs to do and tight schedules, and neither the horses nor their drivers particularly care that you are a 16-year-old girl from Dorset on an errand. You walk close to the buildings, hug the wall. The outside of the pavement is for larger people with more confidence and more room to recover if something goes wrong. The inside, close to the brick and iron, is slower but survivable. The crossing sweeper at the next corner has just completed his arc, a clear path through the filth, 12 inches wide, and there is already a queue of 3 women waiting to use it. An older woman in a dark cape with a basket, a younger woman who might be a governess, a woman whose outfit suggests she's a servant on an errand, like you. You wait. The older woman crosses, the governess crosses, holding her skirts with both hands in the gesture that every woman in London performs at crossings, the slight gathering of the fabric to raise the hem a fraction of an inch above the worst of it. The servant woman crosses. You cross. In the 3 seconds of that crossing, the bottom 2 inches of your cloak and dress pick up whatever the crossing sweeper's broom couldn't quite clear. It's not dramatic. It's not a catastrophe. It's just the small, constant accumulation that is walking through London as a woman in 1863. You don't look down. Looking down doesn't help. The Fulham Road is louder and more chaotic than the residential streets. The draper's where you've been sent is 3 doors past a baker, whose window is producing a warmth and smell of remarkable kindness given the morning. You stop for a moment outside the baker's window, not to buy anything. You just stop. The warmth coming through the glass touches your face. The smell is white flour and yeast and the particular sweetness of something glazed with egg. It is, in the context of November and the state of your boots and the smell of the road behind you, close to a religious experience. Then you move on. The draper's is a narrow shop with a window displaying bolts of cloth in graduated colours, from pale creams at the top to deep wools at the bottom. A bell rings when you open the door. The man behind the counter is small, quick-moving, with the particular alertness of someone who has spent a professional lifetime distinguishing between customers who are going to buy things and customers who are going to stand near things for a long time and then leave. He assesses you in approximately half a second. You present the note. He reads it. He goes to his shelves. You wait. The shop smells of new cloth, which is a specific smell. Sizing and dye and the dry, dusty smell of fibre that hasn't been worked yet, combined with the slight smell of the oil that keeps wooden drawers and cabinets in working order. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is a clean smell, relative to the street. You stand and wait and feel the warmth of the shop soaking into your cloak, and you think, for the first time today but not the last, about what your employer's outer clothes are actually made of, and what they are standing up to, and what they are absorbing from the world. Because here is the thing about Victorian women's clothing that the pictures don't tell you. The paintings and the photographs and the illustrations in the fashion plates that Mrs. Ashmore subscribes to from Paris. The ones that show women in immaculate dresses standing in what appear to be entirely clean environments. Possibly environments that do not contain any of the materials that the human world is actually made of. All of these images lie. Not intentionally, not exactly. They show the intention of the clothes. They show what the clothes are supposed to do, which is create a specific silhouette, communicate a specific social status, and produce a specific visual impression. They do not show what the clothes are actually doing. What the clothes are actually doing in 1863 London is this. They are dragging through streets that haven't been adequately swept since the day before yesterday. They are absorbing the liquid component of whatever the horse population of London has produced, because the cobblestones have joints and the street surface is never entirely flat, and liquid travels along gravity lines, and some of that liquid ends up in the hem of every skirt that walks through it. They are picking up the particular fine particles of coal ash that settle on every horizontal surface in London at approximately the same rate that snow settles in winter, except coal ash doesn't melt. They are dragging through the overflow of the fishmonger's gutters and the water that comes off the greengrocer's vegetables and the puddle near the omnibus stop that has been there long enough to have developed its own ecosystem. By the end of a day that involved going from the house to the draper's and back, a distance of perhaps half a mile, the hem of a woman's dress has collected enough material from the street to be measurably heavier than it was in the morning. You have noticed the difference between the dress as you help Mrs. Ashmore out of it in the evening versus the dress as you helped her into it in the morning. It is heavier. Every day it is heavier than it was. The velvet ribbon is found, measured, cut. The cotton lace retrieved from the correct drawer. The man wraps everything in brown paper and ties it with string, and you settle the account and put the change carefully, coin by coin, back into the purse, and then button the purse shut. You go back out into the November morning. On the way back to the house, you take a slightly longer route. Not by much, perhaps 5 minutes. You go past the park, which at this hour is occupied by nannies with perambulators and a group of older women in good cloaks taking their morning constitutionals with the slightly grim determination of people doing something they've been advised is good for them. You stop at the corner for a moment and watch the women walking. This is something you do now. This is an education you're giving yourself. You watch the way they move, the skirts, the width of them, the cage underneath visible in the silhouette, the particular circular sway of the crinoline as each woman steps, the way the fabric fills and rises and settles with each movement, the hems. You watch the hems. 7 of the women have hems that are, to varying degrees, already compromised by the morning, the darkening along the base of the fabric, the slight stiffness where something has dried. One woman, clearly from a household with less rigorous standards for the outdoor training dress than Mrs. Ashmore's, has a hem that is visibly damp on one side, and you trace the path it must have taken through the crossing at the corner of the Fulham Road, where the crossing sweeper has been slow this morning. 7 out of 11 women. By noon, walking farther, it will be 11 out of 11. This is what the street does to the skirts. The women don't look down. None of them look down. Looking down would acknowledge it, and acknowledging it would be the beginning of a conversation that Victorian society has collectively decided not to have. Back at the house, you leave your cloak and outdoor boots in the lower hall, where they will dry, and change into your indoor shoes. Your dress hem, you note without particular emotion, has a faint greyish line along the lowest inch. Not terrible. A light brushing when you have a moment. Agnes catches your eye as you pass through the kitchen. Mrs. Walsh wants you at 11 for the wardrobe. Every Tuesday, Mrs. Walsh and you go through the wardrobe together, checking the state of each garment, identifying what needs washing, what needs mending, what needs to be noted in the household accounts as approaching end of useful life. It is a more extensive and more interesting task than it sounds, because what you are doing essentially is reading the record of the previous week in the clothing itself. You get other work done first. A seam in one of Mrs. Ashmore's evening bodices that came slightly loose last Thursday needs taking in before Friday's dinner at the Hamiltons. You sew, the needle going in and out of the silk, the bodice pulled to the proper tension. Your hands are not beautiful. They are the hands of someone who works with them. The right index finger has a slight callus at the tip from needle use. The left thumbnail has a bruise from a hammer 3 weeks ago that is still fading. The knuckles are roughened from washing, from cold, from the continuous small abrasions of physical work. But they are accurate hands. They do what you ask them to do. The seam closes. You knot it. Cut the thread. Examine the work. Satisfactory. 11 o'clock. The wardrobe. Mrs. Walsh is 52, which is not old, but looks older in this job because 52 years of running a household in 1863 is 52 years of being responsible for everything and getting credit for nothing, which takes a particular toll. She has grey hair pulled back under her housekeeper's cap, and eyes that take in and file information with the efficiency of a very well-organised filing system. She stands in front of the wardrobe and you stand beside her, and together you go through it. The morning dresses, 3 of them which rotate in a cycle, one being worn, one being cleaned, one resting. The second one comes out. You examine it together. The hem first. Mrs. Walsh lifts it between 2 fingers and holds it to the light. The fabric is a medium blue wool. The hem is approximately 4 inches of interfaced fabric, with the outer fabric folded over it. And the hem, after 3 days of use including 1 trip to the milliner's on King's Road and 1 drive in the carriage to visit Mrs. Ashmore's mother, has collected coal ash adhered to the outer fabric. This will brush out mostly. A stain that might be mud or might be something less definable. This is the kind that you treat with chalk first and then a light soap, applied cold, never hot, because heat sets stains. Along the back hem in particular, where the train of the skirt would have dragged fractionally more than the sides, a general darkening, not a stain, a patina. The fabric is not the same colour it was when the dress was made. It has been subtly but distinctly altered by the world it has walked through. The back hem will need attention, Mrs. Walsh says, which is her way of saying, your job. Yes, Mrs. Walsh. And the collar. She touches the collar, a linen one that attaches separately. The collar is in theory white. In practice, It is the colour of white that has been against a human neck for 3 days, which is not the same colour as white. The neck sweat, the hair oil that transferred from hair to collar with the friction of normal movement, the powder that Mrs. Ashmore uses sparingly at her throat, all of these things accumulate in collars. This is what the clothing knows. Everything Mrs. Ashmore has done in the last 3 days is written in the fabric if you know how to read it. You know how to read it. Wednesday is laundry day, which means Tuesday is preparation day, which means by the time you have finished the wardrobe assessment, you have a considerable pile of things requiring attention and a mental map of what needs to happen to each of them. The chemises, 2 of them, worn on alternate days, currently 3 days used. They will be washed in cold water first, then warm, then rinsed. The soap used will be the Sunlight soap that Mrs. Walsh buys in cakes, which is a newer product, easier on fine fabric than the hard soap cakes from before. The chemises come out cream-coloured when laundered properly. They go in the wash cream-coloured but with the particular texture of worn linen, slightly limp, the fibres compressed by wear, the smell of the body that has been inside them for 3 days. You have dealt with this smell enough now that it no longer surprises you. 3 days of continuous wear on a garment against the skin of a person who, however committed to cleanliness her household standards may be, is a biological organism that produces biological outputs at biologically determined intervals, produces a particular smell, not strong, not offensive in the context of 1863, where the bar for offensive smells is considerably higher than you might imagine. Just, present, human, specific. You handle the chemises, fold them, set them in the laundry basket. The stays are not washed. This bears explanation. The stays are boned with whalebone and stiffened with starch and structured to hold a specific shape, and washing them would compromise all of these things, so the stays are instead aired. The laces are loosened and they are hung by the fireplace or near an open window overnight, and the body heat and the day's exertion evaporate out of them in a way that is more or less satisfactory, given that there is no alternative. In a warm room, the stays that have just been unlaced from a person smell unmistakably of that person. You know your employer's smell in detail that no employee-employer relationship is supposed to involve, because you are the person who unlaces the stays and carries them to the airing hook and relaces them the following morning. This is intimate labour. There is no other word for it, and it is labour that is invisible, unacknowledged, and essentially erased from the record of the day as soon as it is done. The petticoats next. The flannel one is fine for another wearing. The cotton one with the wide hem has a problem you noted, and also a second issue you're noticing now. A small stain at about knee height on the inside. A stain on the inside of a petticoat at approximately knee height is a specific kind of information, the kind that you note in the factual and non-judgmental way that you have learned to note all information about Mrs. Ashmore's clothing. Women in 1863 manage their monthly cycles in ways that are considerably more provisional than anything you would recognize from later centuries. There are no commercial products, there are rags, specifically strips of old linen or cotton kept for the purpose, folded and pinned in place, removed and soaked and washed and reused. The process of managing this in heavy skirts, in tight stays, in a social world that does not acknowledge the existence of this process, is an exercise in logistics under adverse conditions. The stays compress the abdomen. The cage holds the skirts away from the body, which is actually a small mercy in this context, since it creates space. But the pinning, The positioning, the constant awareness of the arrangement while maintaining the external composure of a woman who has absolutely no bodily functions and is entirely constructed from silk and good breeding. This is what the daily reality requires. You treat the stain. Cold water first. Always cold because heat sets. Then the soap. Your hands in the basin. The cold water on your fingers, working at the fabric until the stain lightens and releases. Your wrists ache after the first 5 minutes. You work anyway. This is what the work is. Let me tell you something that the fashion plates do not include. The fashion plates show the clothing in its finished, presentable state. They show the exterior. They show the silhouette and the colour and the trim. They show the intention. They do not show the back hem after a Tuesday walk to the draper's. They do not show the inside of the cuff after 3 days of use. They do not show the armhole lining or the collar at the end of the week or the flannel petticoat hem after a drive across town. They do not show you, Mary Bassett of Dorset, on your knees at a washing basin with cold water up to your wrists, treating a stain on a petticoat while the church bells outside mark 11:30. They do not show this because this is the hidden layer. This is what goes on underneath the image, the labour that makes the image possible, the physical reality that the social presentation is designed to conceal. And you are the person who knows both, the image and the reality. You are the person who constructs the image every morning and dismantles it every evening and deals with the reality in between. You are 17 layers of knowledge walking around in a 7-layer outfit. Friday morning. The weather has gotten colder. You know this not from a thermometer but from the specific quality of the cold in the attic when you wake, which has crossed from uncomfortable into the category of actually cruel, and from the fact that the ice on the basin is thicker than yesterday, and your fingers are stiff for the first 10 minutes after you break it. The gold evening dress has to be got ready, and getting it ready means a full examination of its condition. The gold evening dress has a train, a proper train, in the fashion of the moment. About 16 inches of fabric trailing behind the point where the hem meets the floor at the back. This is beautiful. This is also, in practical terms, 16 inches of fabric that the woman wearing it drags across every surface she walks across. The floor of her carriage, the stone steps of the Hamiltons' house, the marble hall, the carpet of the drawing room, the wooden floor of the dining room. The train on an evening dress accumulates evidence differently from the hem on a morning dress, because an evening dress is worn in interiors. But interiors in 1863 are not clinical spaces. The floor of the Hamiltons' dining room has been swept and possibly waxed, but it has also been walked across by servants, stood on during setting and clearing, and is the repository of whatever has been tracked in from outside, multiplied by the number of people who have walked across it. By the end of an evening, a train has absorbed the wax from the floor, the small particles of whatever was walked in from outside, and in the corners where the train bunches during sitting, a certain concentration of dust that the sweeping mist. The mark Mrs. Ashmore mentioned. There, in the left-back section, a roughly oval shadow slightly deeper than the surrounding gold. It has been treated by you with the chalk and cool water method, and the improvement is real. When you first treated it, the mark was clearly defined, the edges sharp. Now the edges have diffused and the centre is lighter, but there is still a perceptible difference in the tone of the fabric in that area. Mrs. Ashmore's right falling train strategy is correct. You spend 40 minutes on the dress. At the end of 40 minutes it is as good as it can be, which is to say, it is beautiful. The gold silk catches the winter morning light coming through the sewing room window, and it glows warm and deep, in the way that things made with real care and real money glow. The velvet trim is soft, the train falls correctly, the mark is negligible, it is a beautiful dress, and it will be back in your hands tomorrow morning with the full account of Friday's dinner written into it. The Friday dinner preparation begins at 4, which means at 3:30 you're in her room with everything laid out and ready. For a formal dinner the understructure is the same but worn differently. The stays laced tighter, because an evening silhouette requires it, because the fashions of 1863 demand a specific shape that is approximately 1 inch more extreme at the waist than the morning shape, because the dinner table is the most visible social performance of the week, and every element of it will be scrutinized by women who have spent as much time on their own presentations as you've spent on this one, and they will know. The crinoline cage is the same cage but supported differently. Over it goes not the practical cotton petticoat, but a silk taffeta one, because the evening dress is silk and the skirts need to move the way silk moves, with a particular fluid authority, and flannel will not do this. Layers assembled, the dress lowered over the whole structure, the bodice fastened. The back closure. This one is the hook and eye variety, which is both faster and fiddlier than buttons, and requires a specific tool that you hold between your teeth while you use both hands to position the hook against the eye at the precise angle that will close it cleanly. It closes. The necklace, the diamonds, real diamonds, which you handle as if they are alive and might bite. The clasp is small and the stone arrangement at the centre is delicate, and the whole thing costs more than this household's annual coal bill. Your hands are steady. They are always steady. You have learned to make them steady by deciding that trembling is not an option. The clasp closes, you check it. The pearl earrings, the gloves, white kid, long to the elbow. You ease them on finger by finger, working out the air bubbles that gather at the joints. The gloves are tight. That is correct. They are supposed to be tight. Done. Hair. The evening arrangement. Much more elaborate than the morning or afternoon. 30 minutes of careful work. The whole thing pinned so that it will endure 3 to 4 hours of a dinner party, including a carriage ride each way, and whatever atmospheric conditions exist in the Hamiltons' drawing room. She watches herself in the glass. The transformation is complete. The woman standing in front of you is not the woman who was lying in bed this morning in her flannel nightgown, with her hair loose and her face soft with sleep. This woman is finished. She has been built layer by layer, from the linen chemise outward, and the result of 2 hours of your labour is a silhouette that will move through the Hamiltons' drawing room as if she simply appeared that way, as if being this put together is as natural and effortless as breathing. It is not effortless. It is effort. All of it. From the ice-cold basin at 5 in the morning to the 32 buttons of the morning dress to the 40 minutes on the train this afternoon, to these gloves eased on finger by finger, it is effort. Yours. She doesn't acknowledge this. This is not a criticism. It is the structure of the thing. The labour is supposed to be invisible. If the labour were visible, if the effort showed, then the presentation would fail. The whole point of the construction is that it should appear not to be a construction. You have made her invisible labour, and in doing so, you have disappeared. Thank you, Mary. Enjoy your evening, ma'am. Now, while she is at dinner, while the carriage takes her across Kensington, and the driver waits outside the Hamiltons' house in the cold, you have several hours, not 3 hours, not exactly, but hours without her direct call. You use them to do the laundry. The laundry is, in my view, the most honest part of this story. Everything else has a performance element to it. The dressing is performance. The wardrobe assessment is preparation for performance. Even the errand to the drapers has the performance of someone going out in the public world. But the laundry is just reality. The accumulated biological truth of the week. Soaking in basins and being worked with your hands and dealt with. The laundry room is in the basement. It is a warm room because it houses the copper boiler, which is a large metal tub over a fire grate. And when the fire is going and the water boiling, the laundry room is the warmest room in the house. It smells of lye soap and steam and the indefinable warm wet smell of fabric being cleaned. A smell that gets into your hair and stays there, and that you have come to associate entirely with this building, with this work, with this specific version of your life. You start with the chemises. You put them in cold water first. This is the rule before any other rule. Cold water first, to release the biological content before it sets. Because heat fixes proteins in fabric the way it fixes proteins in a pan, and a heat-set stain in fine linen is a problem that requires solutions far more time-consuming than the 5 minutes it takes to cold soak before washing. The chemises go in the basin. The cold water moves through the fabric. You work them gently, pressing and releasing, feeling the fabric soften, and the water cloud slightly with whatever the fabric has absorbed in the last 3 days. 3 days of being against a person's skin. 3 days of sleep and movement and the small secretions of the living body. All of it releasing now into the cold water. You work. Your hands in the basin. The water cold enough that after 10 minutes your fingers are aching in the specific way that cold water work produces. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the deep, dull ache of circulation being restricted, the joints stiff and reluctant. But you work. You release the linen, examine it, work again. The watercolour changes as you go. Then the soap, worked into a lather. Your knuckles against the ribbed washboard, the linen moving through your hands, the soap lather, your arms aching in the particular way that laundry arms ache, a deep fatigue in the forearms and wrists, the tendons from repeated wringing and working, the collars next, soaking in cold water, then the soap, then the warm water, then the rinse. You hold the collar up to the laundry room lamp and check it. The staining is gone. The linen is back to its proper colour, or close. Victorian white, which is not actually white, but the warm cream of linen treated well, which is a different white from the blue white of bleached cotton, and a more honest white in some ways, because it shows what linen actually is. The petticoat with the interior stain. You have left this cold soaked since this afternoon, and when you take it up from the soaking basin, the stain has largely released. A little more soap, some pressure. Gone. This is the process. It is not glamorous. It is not the part of the story that gets illustrated in the fashion plates, but it is the part that makes the fashion plates possible. Without the Tuesday laundry and the Thursday treatment and the Friday cold soak, the image in the glass doesn't happen. The composed woman in the blue calling dress doesn't exist without the woman in the basement with cold water up to her wrists, working the evidence out of the week's fabric. You wring the chemises carefully, not twisted, wrung between your hands in the way you've been shown, which preserves the fibre rather than distressing it. You hang them on the drying rack near the copper boiler. Your back aches. Your hands are red from the cold water and the soap. There's a small cut on your left index finger from the edge of a button hook earlier. that has been stinging since it met the lye soap. You dry your hands on the rough laundry towel. She comes home at 11. You're awake because you have trained yourself to be awake on evenings when she is out, in the particular alert way of someone who has responsibility. Your body has learned to wait. The bell at 11:15. You go down. She's still in the full evening construction, but she has the look of a construction that has survived 4 hours of a dinner party. The hair slightly less precise than when she left. The gloves removed and carried. A slight crease in the train where it pooled around her chair. She is fine. She is tired. She is ready to be put down. You unbutton the back of the evening dress. 32 hooks and eyes reversed. The sound of each one opening, small metal click, and the bodice loosening incrementally. The necklace unclasped, put away. The earrings, small weight removed from each ear. The gloves, eased off finger by finger. The dress lifted away, and the evening's record now in your hands. The train has collected the trajectory of the Hamiltons' evening. The dining room floor, the carpet of the drawing room, the stone of the front steps, a new line of something, faint, along the left side of the train, approximately where it might have caught against the leg of a chair or the baseboard of a wall. You hang the dress. You will deal with its record tomorrow, the stays unlaced. Her exhale as they loosen. Her posture changes immediately, involuntarily, the shoulders dropping a fraction, and the body reclaiming some of its natural volume, the compressed ribs expanding outward, the breath coming slightly differently. This happens every night. You have seen it enough times now that it no longer registers as anything except the natural end of the day. The construction coming down, the person underneath it appearing. The crinoline cage unfastened, set aside, springs back to its resting position with a slight metallic sound. The petticoats, the chemise. She is left in her nightgown, which you have warmed at the fire. She sits before the glass and you unpin her hair, the elaborate construction collapsing section by section as the pins come out, the hairpiece set aside, the real hair falling loose around her shoulders. You brush it. 50 strokes, as is the custom. The hair loosening, the day's arrangement releasing, the pomade softening as the brush works through. She does not speak much at this hour, neither do you. It is companionable silence of the specific kind that exists between people who know each other in the way that employer and employee know each other in this intimate domestic context. Not friendship, never friendship, but a kind of wordless functional understanding that is its own thing. You braid her hair for sleeping. 2 plaits, not tight, just enough to keep it from tangling. Done. She dismisses you with a nod. You gather the items that need taking away and carry them upstairs. In the attic, Agnes is asleep again. Patience has the evening off, which means Patience is not in her bed, which means Patience is somewhere doing something she will not discuss in the morning. You put down your load and sit on the edge of your bed in the dark, and your body reports its day to you. The hands, first, stiff at the knuckles, the laundry soap still caught in the lines of the cut on the left finger. The forearms, a deep ache that is the laundry basin's work, working its way up to the elbows. Your back is tired from bending, over the wardrobe, over the washing basin, the small continuous forward lean that close work requires. Your feet are fine. Your feet are usually fine because you're 16, and your feet have not yet decided to become an opinion. You are cold. The room is cold. The last of the warmth from the kitchen, which drifts up through the building through the evening, has dissipated. You pull off your boots and your stockings and slide your feet under the blanket, and then the whole rest of you after them and lie in the dark with the blanket and the shawl arranged, and you listen to the sounds of the house settling. This is your day. But I want to stop here, on this Friday night in November 1863, and tell you something about a danger that we've been circling around all day. We have talked about the hem. We have talked about the laundry. We have talked about the social performance of cleanliness and the physical labour that maintains it. And all of those things are real and all of them are important. But there is one thing about the crinoline that we have not discussed, and it is the most important thing. The crinoline cage, as we have established, holds the skirts of a woman's dress away from her body in a wide circle, with several inches of air between the fabric and herself. This air gap does two things. It makes the silhouette beautiful. It also, in the presence of heat, becomes a chimney. A chimney is an efficient tool for one thing: moving air upward past a heat source in a way that accelerates combustion. When a woman wearing a crinoline dress stands near an open fire, which is the primary source of heat in every room of every house in 1863, the air inside the cage begins to warm. Warm air rises. As it rises, it draws cooler air in from the bottom, which must enter by passing over the heat source, which is the fire. The moving air carries oxygen to the fire. The fire burns hotter. The hotter air rises faster. The fabric of the skirt, held close to the heat source by the mechanical properties of the cage, begins to warm. And fabric, when it gets warm enough, ignites. This happens faster than you can imagine, not gradually, not with warning time, with a speed that the women who experienced it described in the accounts that survive as instantaneous, 1 second standing, the next second in flames. Between 1856 and 1866, the decade of peak crinoline, this happened to women throughout England at a rate that historians looking back at the records will find, and then find again, and be unable to quite believe. 3,000 women per year in England alone. A conservative estimate. Women who stood too close to a fireplace. Women who bent to retrieve something from the hearth. Women who turned their backs to the fire to warm themselves, which is the natural thing to do when cold, which puts the entire back of the dress in the thermal column of the fire's heat. They burned. Some of them survived. Some of them did not. You have not talked about this with Mrs. Ashmore. It is not your place to bring it up. But you know about it because you are a person who pays attention, and the people who pay attention in this house are the servants, not the family, because the servants move through the entire house and hear what is said in different rooms, and read the newspapers when they're left out, and know the woman who works for the Ashmore's cousins, and heard from her what happened at a dinner party in May. What happened at a dinner party in May? The cousin's wife turned from the fire in the drawing room to speak to someone, and her train caught. It was a cotton muslin dress which burns faster than silk. By the time anyone moved, the train was fully alight, and the flames were travelling upward toward the cage. She lived. Because her husband moved fast and threw the contents of a water jug over her before the flames reached the cage. The cage, if reached by fire, becomes a framework that holds the flames around the body, feeding them air from below, turning the woman inside into the centre of a draft system. She lived. She has burns on both legs from knee to ankle, and will have them for the rest of her life. The dress was completely destroyed. You know this story. You hold it in your head every time you help Mrs. Ashmore with the evening preparations, every time she moves through the drawing room with its fireplace, every time the crinoline passes within a certain distance of any open flame. You do not say anything. There is no appropriate vocabulary in this household, in this social world for you to say, "Ma'am, please stay away from the fire, I am worried." You watch. That's all you can do. You watch. And then, 6 weeks after you first heard the story, on a Wednesday evening in December, you're nearly not watching at the right moment. Mrs. Ashmore is in the drawing room, and she has asked you to bring the blue shawl from her bedroom, and you are on your way back down the main stairs, the shawl folded over your arm, and you can see through the half-open drawing room door that she's moved closer to the fire than she was when you left, and that the hem of her afternoon dress has swung, with the particular pendulum logic of the crinoline cage, toward the hearth-guard. The hearth-guard. This house has a hearth-guard, a fender of decorative brass that is supposed to prevent exactly this. Many houses do now, precisely because of the pattern of accidents that has been accumulating since the crinolines became fashionable. It is not a perfect solution. A hearth-guard prevents the accidental step into the fire. It does not prevent the skirt's arc as a woman turns. The skirt is not touching the guard. Not quite. Mrs. Ashmore is turned toward a book she is consulting, her body angled so that the back of her skirt is the side closest to the fire, and the pendulum has carried it to maybe 4 inches from the brass fender. 4 inches from the fender is not on fire, but 4 inches from the fender, from a fire that has been going for 6 hours and is now at its most energetic, and with a cage that is turning ambient heat into a draft system, is considerably closer than you want it to be. You walk into the drawing room. "Ma'am," she looks up, "your shawl." You cross the room, putting yourself between her and the fire in the movement of crossing, and as you hand her the shawl, you adjust your own position so that the small repositioning required for the handoff necessitates her taking a small step forward, toward you, toward the room, away from the hearth. It is not dramatic. It is not visible as a safety intervention. It is simply the geometry of handing someone a shawl. She steps forward, takes the shawl. "Thank you, Mary." You step back. The skirt swings. It is now 8 inches from the guard instead of 4. "Is there anything else, Mum?" "No, that'll be all." You leave the room. You close the door. You stand in the corridor for a moment, your back to the wall, and breathe. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. But something almost did, and you don't know if she saw it and didn't react, or if she genuinely didn't see it at all. You think the latter. She was reading. She had shifted toward the warmth without noticing. The cage had followed. She didn't notice because she has been wearing this cage for 7 years, and her body's relationship to it is unconscious, automatic. She doesn't think about where the skirts are any more than you think about where your own legs are. They are simply there. They are part of her geography. The fire's relationship to the skirts, however, is not unconscious. The fire doesn't care about social performance. The fire doesn't understand fashion. You go back to the laundry room and finish the ironing. Your hands are steady. They are always steady. There is a print you've seen in shop windows, an artist named Hogarth, who died before you were born, who documented London's worst habits with the specific viciousness of someone who loved the city while being disgusted by it. But closer to your own time, there is another artist, a cartoonist really, who draws for Punch magazine, and who has been depicting women in crinolines catching fire for several years now, in that way that Punch has of making catastrophes into jokes before the catastrophes have finished happening. The cartoons show fashionable women at dinner parties, at balls, at private concerts, their skirts in various stages of combustion. The caricature style exaggerates everything. The width of the cages becomes truly absurd, 6 feet across, 8 feet, wider than doorways. The fires leap improbably high. The expressions on the burning women are comic rather than agonized. It is meant to be funny. It is not funny. You know this now in your hands and your forearms, in the vigilance you have taught yourself to maintain near every fire in every room you accompany Mrs. Ashmore into. You know it in the way you check the position of the cage relative to the hearth every time she sits in a room with an active fire, a habit so automatic now that you're not always aware you're doing it. 3,000 women a year, burned by their own clothes, in their own drawing rooms, in front of their own fires. The fashion plates don't include this either. January arrives, the coldest month. The basin ice is thicker now every morning, and your fingers after breaking it are stiff for the first quarter hour of the day, fumbling slightly with the pins and buttons and lace hooks until the blood circulation catches up with the demands being made of the hands. You manage. You have learned to manage everything a little slower in January and to start earlier to compensate. The cold presents specific challenges to the entire enterprise of dressing and undressing. The stays, when cold, are more rigid than in warmer months, the whalebone having contracted slightly with the temperature. You warm them by the fire before bringing them to her, as always, but the January fires take longer to heat the room, and sometimes you're working with stays that are still cool at the edges even after warming, and you can feel the slight stiffness in the boning as you try to achieve the correct lacing. Her skin is cold in the mornings. This is a detail that you are aware of without commenting on it. The temperature of her back under your hands as you work the lacing. The slight involuntary tensing as the cold fabric meets cold flesh before the warmth of the effort begins to transfer between them. But here is a thing about January that is not entirely terrible. The frost fares. When the Thames freezes, which it does in cold enough winters, the whole city pours onto the ice, and January of this particular year is cold enough. You hear about it first from Agnes, who heard about it from the milk delivery boy, who crossed on the ice himself at London Bridge on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Walsh gives you Sunday afternoon, which she rarely does. You walk to the river with Agnes, who is younger than you, and who approaches the frozen Thames with a combination of joy and terror that you find rather touching. The ice is thick enough. Vendors are set up on it, selling coffee from braziers and roasted chestnuts and little printed cards that say "Bought at the Frost Fair, Thames, January 1864, and which are meant as souvenirs, but which strike you as somewhat optimistic, since what you're doing is walking on a frozen river, and the ice might always decide to become a river again. The sound of it, the low groaning of the ice as it shifts, a sound like the building settling at night but deeper, more fundamental, a geological sound rather than an architectural one. The cold coming up through the soles of your boots, the brazier smoke blowing toward you and then away, the smell of roasting chestnuts and somewhere further along roasting meat. Agnes buys a printed card and holds it with both hands. It says 1864, she says. Can you imagine? In 50 years someone will find this. You look at the card, the date, the river frozen under your feet. In 50 years the river will not freeze like this. The Thames embankment will be built, and the river will be narrowed and dredged and tamed, and the specific conditions that produce frost fares will be gone. But you don't know this. Nobody in 1864 knows this. The frost fair is simply what happens when winter is cold enough, as it has been happening since the medieval period, a tradition older than the city as you know it. Agnes buys chestnuts. You walk back along the ice close to the south bank, listening to the groaning, feeling the cold rise from below. Behind you, London continues its winter smoke. Ahead, the South Bank rises to its skyline of chimneys and church towers. The river is ice and it is solid, and the city is standing on it, briefly, on the wrong side of the ordinary laws. Everything is temporary, but this moment is undeniably real. March, the mud, specific London spring mud, which is a product of the winter's accumulated street deposit beginning to break up in warmer air, and the result is a viscous brown-grey substance of remarkable tenacity. It attacks hems. It attaches to fabric at the molecular level, or so it seems, and it dries to a stiff crust that must be removed before it can be washed, and removing it requires patience and a stiff brush, and a tolerance for the smell of spring London mud, which has its own specific quality. Slightly organic, slightly mineral, slightly of everything that has accumulated on the streets through November and December, and January and February, now released and mobile. You spend more time on hems in March than in any other month. April, better. The streets drying, the hems still accumulating evidence. Always accumulating, but the evidence is lighter. Dry dust, the occasional spring pollen that settles on darker fabrics as a faint yellow wash, easily brushed. June arrives and with it the heat. You have not considered, until you live through your first London summer in service, what it means to wear 7 layers of clothing, including a cage that holds the outer layers away from your body, but consequently holds heated air around your body all day, in temperatures that can reach 80 degrees or higher. What it means is sweat. Considerable sweat, produced by a body that is working hard to regulate its temperature against the mechanical impediment of its clothing. The chemise, which is the first garment against the skin, absorbs this sweat. This is its function, actually. It is designed to be the layer that accepts the body's secretions and protects the outer garments from them. In summer, the chemise does a great deal of absorbing. A summer chemise, after a day of heat and activity, has a smell that the winter chemise doesn't have. Not a pleasant smell, the smell of hard work. The smell of a body pushed past the comfortable operational range of its clothing. The heat rash. She has never mentioned it to you directly, but you see it when you help her undress in summer evenings. The line of redness along her sides where the boning of the stays has been pressing, and pressed more aggressively in the heat, and the skin has reacted. She treats it herself with a powder she keeps in the lower drawer of the dressing table, and the drawer is private in the way that some drawers in her room are private and you don't open them unless asked. But you see the rash. You know it's there. This is the body under the construction, red and hot and pressed and alive, doing what bodies do regardless of what the social world requires them to pretend. And then there is the green dress. It arrives in August, commissioned from a dressmaker in Regent Street who has a reputation for keeping current with Parisian fashions. It is a particular shade of green, brilliant, almost luminous, a green that catches the eye from across a room and holds it. Mrs. Ashmore is delighted with it. It is, by any objective assessment, the most striking thing in the wardrobe. You hang it and turn to do other work and then stop. You go back to it. You stand very close to the green and examine the dye on the silk. The colour is extraordinary. You have not seen this precise green on any other garment in the 3 years you've been doing this work. It is a green that seems to exist at a different intensity from the other greens in the wardrobe. Something feels wrong in a way you cannot immediately name. You go to Mrs. Walsh. Mrs. Walsh examines the dress with the particular calm of a woman who has been examining clothing for 30 years and has seen most things. Shields green, she says finally. Ma'am? Arsenite of copper. The dye. It's what gives you that colour. She holds the fabric slightly away from herself as she examines it. Very fashionable. Arsenic. You know the word from the household's rodent management, which involves arsenical paste, which you are instructed never to touch without gloves and always to wash your hands after handling. Arsenic is a poison, a very effective poison. This is not new knowledge. The dress, ma'am, she's going to wear it. Mrs. Walsh looks at you. Lots of women wear it. The dye is sealed into the fabric. It won't cause harm in normal wearing. She sounds, as she says this, not entirely convinced by her own statement. And she is correct not to be entirely convinced. The Sheely's green dye, arsenic copper acetate, is indeed used throughout the fashion industry in the 1860s in wallpapers, in artificial flowers worn on hats and bodices, in dress fabrics. The argument that it is safely sealed in the fabric has been made many times by many manufacturers who have a financial interest in continuing to make and sell arsenic-coloured green things. The countervailing evidence: the women who make artificial flowers with Sheely's green dye are dying. They are known as green girls, and they work in the East End factories, and they develop suppurating sores on their hands and faces and lungs, and they die at rates that are, statistically, difficult to explain as coincidence. The arsenic that is supposedly sealed into the fabric is not. It emerges quite as sealed as the manufacturers claim. It releases in moisture, sweat for instance, which is what happens when a body inside the dress heats up. This is not widely known in 1863. It'll become known slowly over the next decade, as the doctors make the connections that seem obvious in retrospect, and that nobody wants to make at the time because making them requires acknowledging that the fashion industry has been poisoning women in the name of a particular shade of green. You look at the green dress. You look at Mrs. Walsh. Mrs. Walsh looks at the dress. "I'll speak to her," she says. You do not hear the conversation. But the green dress is returned to the dressmaker within the week, and the invoice is credited, and the explanation given is that the style was found to be unsuitable after all. The dressmaker is not told why. Mrs. Walsh does not explain to you what she said to Mrs. Ashmore. Some things remain in the household's administrative layer, the layer where decisions are made and carried forward without detailed accounting. The green dress disappears from the wardrobe, but this is worth knowing. By 1860, an estimated 20 tons of arsenic had been used to colour wallpapers, fabrics, and decorative items in England alone. Women were walking around in it, sleeping next to it, wearing it against their skin. The beautiful green that made fashionable women's drawing rooms and fashionable women's dresses the envy of those who couldn't afford them. It was poisoning the women inside the rooms and inside the dresses. The hidden layer. Again. Always the hidden layer. September 1864. Almost a year since you arrived. Something has changed in the last 12 months. Not the work. The work is the same chemises in the cold basin, the same hem examinations, the same 32 buttons, the same 50 brushstrokes at night. The work is the same. What has changed is you. You move through the house differently than you did a year ago. You know it now, the architectural logic of the place, which rooms drain heat fastest in winter, which windows face south and get morning light that warms the dressing room in a way useful for the stays. You know Mrs. Ashmore's preferences with a completeness that borders on the unconscious. You reach for the right necklace before she asks. You know that the flannel petticoat will be her choice on cold mornings without being told. You know the particular tension in her shoulders when she's dreading something, and the way she sits slightly differently at her mirror on those days. You know things you've never been told and were never asked to know. This is what a year of intimate labour produces. You're also getting better at the work in a material sense. The hems come cleaner than they did at the beginning. The hair arrangements have acquired a sureness that wasn't there before. The stays are laced more efficiently. The right tension found faster. The process taking 7 minutes now rather than 12. Mrs. Ashmore has noticed, not directly. But you have been given, over the past 6 months, a series of small additional responsibilities that were not in your original remit. The management of the small jewellery repairs, the communication with the dressmaker's shop on alterations, the preparation of the household linen inventory that used to be Mrs. Walsh's job alone. These are not promotions. There is no promotion system exactly, but they are acknowledgements, a form of trust expressed through additional work, which is the language this world speaks. You're sitting in the sewing room on a Thursday afternoon in September, hand-stitching the hem of a new summer dress that arrived from the dressmaker without its proper hem depth. The light from the window is the specific gold of late September, which is the most honest light, the light that shows everything, the slight irregularity in the stitch you just put in, the faint line of fading at the fold of the fabric where it's been stored, the dust motes in the air between you and the window. Mrs. Walsh comes in. She stands in the doorway for a moment. She's holding something. The Winterton household has inquired after you, she says. You look up. You set down the needle. Lady Winterton is looking for a personal maid. They live in Belgravia. The pause is meaningful. Belgravia is a step up, a larger house, a wealthier family, a higher calibre of domestic service, which means higher standards and higher pay and a different category of everything, better fabrics to manage, more elaborate social occasions, a larger wardrobe. She heard about you from Mrs. Hamilton. Mrs. Hamilton. Friday's dinner. The dinner you prepared the gold evening dress for. The dress whose train you treated and whose mark you managed with the correctly positioned fall. Someone talked about the dress. Or rather, someone noticed the dress and mentioned it, and the source of the dress's impeccable maintenance was a piece of information that travelled from drawing room to drawing room in the particular way that information travels in this world. You have been seen through the dress. She would like to meet you, Mrs. Walsh says. You understand what this means, and you understand what it will mean to tell Mrs. Ashmore. That night in the attic, you lie in the dark and listen to Agnes sleep and Patience snore, and you think about the year of hems, the year of learning to read the record of other people's lives in the fabric they wear, the year of cold basins and lye soap and the specific ache in the forearms that laundry produces, the year of 32 buttons twice a day and stays laced and unlaced, and hair pinned and unpinned, the year of the gold evening dress and the train and the mark and the careful adjustment of the fall, the year of the green dress that went back, the year of standing in the drawing-room doorway with a shawl and moving the geometry of the room by 3 steps without anyone calling it what it was. You have learned things that are not in books. You have learned that the most immaculate woman in the room is immaculate because someone has spent 2 hours making her immaculate, and someone will spend 2 more hours undoing that immaculacy and treating the evidence of it. You have learned that cleanliness is not a state. It is a practice. It is something that is actively produced every day against the constant tendency of the physical world to undo it. The street is always depositing itself on the hems. The body is always producing what bodies produce. The stays will always need to be unlaced, and the hair will always need brushing, and the chemises will always need the basin. You have learned that the image and the reality are separated by exactly the width of your hands, because your hands are what goes between them, what constructs the image from the reality every morning and what dismantles the image back into the reality every night. And you have learned something else, something that took longer. The women in the street with the heavy hems and the exhausted faces, the ones who carry their own baskets to the market and walk where they need to go, and whose hems tell the full story of the city they live in. They are not less than Mrs. Ashmore. They are not less clean in the ways that matter. They are simply not hiding the evidence of being alive in the same city because they cannot afford to. The hiding is expensive. The hiding requires money and labour and a specific person, a person like you who does the hiding. You did not know this before you came to London. You know it now. The Winterton house is a 5-storey terraced house in Eaton Square, which is the kind of address that communicates its own information. The door is painted black and is polished to a shine that you can see your own reflection in, which is itself a statement about the standards of the household. You knock at the servants' entrance. The interview is conducted by the housekeeper, Mrs. Fernsby, who is 60, who has been in this household for 30 years, and who has the specific aura of someone who has seen everything and been surprised by nothing. She asks standard questions: how long you've been in service, what your previous experience is, whether you're comfortable with travel, as Lady Winterton visits relations in Scotland in August. Then she asks you about the gold evening dress. Not about Mrs. Ashmore, about the dress. What was the mark and how did you treat it and what was the outcome? You tell her. Chalk and cold water, the treatment of the edges, the outcome, the adjustment of the train fall to conceal what remained. You speak precisely, because this is a conversation about fabric and technique, and you know the facts. Mrs. Fernsby writes something in her book. Lady Winterton will see you. Lady Winterton is 48, tall, with the particular quality of a woman who has been beautiful, and knows that what she has now is better. Not beauty, but authority. She's in her morning room, writing letters, and she does not stop writing when you enter, which you understand immediately is not rudeness, but assessment. She is watching, from the corner of her attention, how you stand and how you hold yourself and how you deal with the fact of being slightly ignored. You stand correctly. You hold yourself correctly. You deal with the slight ignoring by simply being present, which is correct. She finishes the letter, blots it, sets it aside. She looks at you. Mrs. Fernsby tells me you treated a silk train. Yes, my lady. The mark was oil-based. A composite stain, my lady, primarily wax with a lighter oil component from the floor surface. The wax component was treated first with chalk and cold water to lift the surface deposit. The oil was then addressed with a light application of fuller's earth left to draw for 30 minutes before brushing. She looks at you for a moment. Where did you learn that? Trial, my lady, and a book Mrs. Walsh recommended. She nods. Not at what you said, at something she has confirmed about you. I have 3 evening dresses with trains, a court presentation gown from 1858, a set of morning and afternoon dresses that my previous maid who has retired maintained very well. I would expect the same standard. I would provide it, my lady. Your hairdressing? Competent, my lady. Improving. Honest. I prefer it. She looks at you for another moment. 2 weeks' notice to Mrs. Ashmore. monthly wages of 14 shillings, rising to 16 after 6 months if the standard is maintained. Sundays and Thursday afternoons, you'll have your own room. Your own room. Thank you, my lady. Your last morning at 14 Harrington Gardens. You wake before the bell and lie in the dark for a moment. The attic room, Agnes's breathing, the hairline crack in the basin, the tiny window with the brick wall beyond it, the thin blanket and the shawl arranged together, the cold, all of it simultaneously and for the last time, exactly what it is. You get up, you break the ice in the basin, you wash your face, you dress, you help Mrs. Ashmore for the last time. The chemise, the stays laced to the familiar tension, the drawers, the crinoline, 2 petticoats, the morning dress, the hair. You do her hair for the last time with the same attention as every other morning, because it's the same hair and it requires the same things, and the fact that it is the last time is information that belongs to you and not the work. Done. She looks in the glass. Mary? Ma'am? You will come back if things don't work out. This is not an invitation. It is the closest she can get within the vocabulary available to her to saying something she doesn't have the right words for. Thank you, ma'am. The walk to Eaton Square takes 40 minutes. You walk close to the buildings. You step over the crossings carefully. You watch your hem on the Fulham Road junction and step over the worst of it. The November air is cold and coal-smelled and horse-smelled and everything smelled. London is exactly what it was when you first arrived, but you are different. You know things. You have spent 15 months learning to read the hidden record of women's lives in the fabric of their clothing. You have been the person who constructs the image every morning and dismantles it every night, and spends the hours between maintaining the gap between the two, the image and the reality, the hem and the clean dress, the stays and the body that lives inside them, the clean collar and the woman who wore it through 3 days. You know both. You carry both. The trunk is heavy. The day is cold. The Winterton house is 40 minutes away, and then you will start learning a new wardrobe, a new woman's record, a new set of 32 buttons. But right now you're just walking through London in November, with the city depositing itself on your hem with every step, accumulating evidence of where you've been and where you're going, the way it always does, the way it always will. Let's stop here for a moment, because what I've described here, Mary's 15 months at 14 Harrington Gardens, is a specific story. One woman, one household. And I want to pull back now, because to understand the full picture you need to understand that this story was happening in slightly different versions in every house of a certain class in England, every single day. There are, in 1863, approximately 1.5 million women in domestic service in England and Wales. Approximately 70,000 of them are classified as ladies' maids in the census, though this is almost certainly an undercount because the census classification system is inconsistent, and many women doing essentially the same work are classified differently. 1.5 million women doing this work every day, getting up before dawn in the cold rooms, heating the water, managing the clothing of the women above them on the social scale, with all that involves, treating the stains, ironing the linen, working the hems, doing it again, and above them, the women in the dresses, the women being dressed, also trapped in a different way, by the clothing itself, by the social performance it represents, by the physical reality of wearing 17 pounds of structured fabric in the heat of summer and the cold of winter, by the stays that compress the ribs, and by the hem that drags through the street, and by the social world that requires the image to be perfect, even as the reality is perpetually trying to assert itself. Both groups of women, on either side of the dressing room glass, are operating under constraints that have been constructed for them rather than by them. The lady's maid with her cold water basin and aching wrists. The lady with her compressed ribs and her careful carriage. They're not in the same position. The difference in power between them is real and significant, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But they are both, in different ways, inside the same system. The system that requires the image to be maintained. The system that requires the labour to be invisible. The system that produces the fashion plate and papers over the hem. March 1865, Eaton Square. Lady Winterton is different from Mrs. Ashmore. Older. More formal in some ways, less interested in the fine details of appearance in others. She cares about quality. The court presentation gown is treated with reverence. Her everyday morning dresses are managed competently rather than obsessively. She has, in 30 years of dressing for a specific social world, developed a calm about her appearance that Mrs. Ashmore's younger and more anxious relationship with the same world hasn't quite arrived at yet. Your own room is a fact you've still not quite accustomed yourself to. It is small at the top of the house, with a window that faces the square's garden. It has a fire grate, and the household provides coal, which is still remarkable to you after the Harrington Gardens attic. There is room for a chair beside the fire as well as a bed. You sit in the evening sometimes and read. Mrs. Walsh gave you a book before you left, a household management manual, which is not exactly pleasurable reading, but which contains information useful enough that you have read it 3 times. Mrs. Fernsby, observing this, has lent you others. There is a small library of domestic science, and a few novels and a pamphlet on the laundering of delicate fabrics that you have annotated in the margins in pencil. You're becoming, quietly and without plan, a person who knows things. July 1865. The heat. Lady Winterton's court presentation gown is the heaviest garment in the wardrobe. It was made in 1858 for her presentation at the levee, and it represents the formal wear requirements of the royal court, which in 1858 means multiple underskirts, the widest possible crinoline, a train that is longer than an ordinary dress train, a bodice with extended point at the front, a neckline that is lower than day wear, a requirement for white kid gloves to above the elbow, feathers in the hair, and a total weight of garments that you have estimated by carrying various components at approximately 22 pounds. Lady Winterton has not worn it since 1862. There is no occasion requiring it at present, but it requires maintenance regardless. Airing every 3 months, examination for moth, treatment of the white silk against yellowing. In July's heat, you bring it out for its quarterly examination. The silk is cream white. It has held its colour well. The storage is correct, wrapped in acid-free tissue, kept from light. The train is 12 feet long when fully extended. The underskirts, 2 of them in a particular cage construction specific to courtwear, are still structurally sound. You examine the hem. The hem on this dress tells a story of 3 formal occasions. The original presentation in 1858 and 2 subsequent court events. The hem has been carefully treated after each, and it shows. The marks are minimal, the overall condition excellent. But there is something. Along the back left section of the train, at approximately the point where it would have pooled when she was seated in the carriage on the way home from the 1862 occasion, there is a very faint line, not a stain exactly, a mark. The kind of mark that is the memory of something that was treated but not entirely erased. You have been treating this for 16 months. You have been patient with it. And it has been, every time you examine it, approximately the same, present but minimal, the ghost of something that happened 3 years ago. Today you try a new approach, a very dilute application of oxalic acid solution, which you have read about in one of Mrs. Fernsby's pamphlets, applied with a fine brush, left for 30 minutes, neutralize with bicarbonate, rinse carefully. You do this outside in the garden, because the July light is better than any indoor light for this kind of work. You kneel on the paving stones with the train spread on a clean sheet, working with the finest brush from the sewing box, applying the solution in tiny, precise strokes along the mark's edge. The garden smells of the roses that flower along the south-facing wall. The July air, even with the coal smoke and the distant Thames smell, has moments of actual sweetness. Your hands work. Your eyes check. The solution does its work. An hour later, rinsed and dried, the mark is gone. Not reduced. Gone. You hold the silk up to the July light and there is no line, no shadow, no memory of whatever happened in the carriage in 1862. You fold the train back into its tissue. You put the dress away. This is where I want to bring you back to the beginning. The woman walking down the London street in her immaculate dress. The hem dragging. The city being collected in the fabric. The fashion plates lie, as we said. They show the intention and not the reality. They show the image that requires labour to maintain and conceal the labour in the same gesture. But here is the other side of this. The lie is not simply a deception. It is, in a complicated way, also a kind of faith, a kind of belief in the possibility of the image, an insistence that the image is worth maintaining, worth the labour, worth the cold basins and the aching forearms and the 32 buttons twice a day. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Historians looking back at this period from a position of knowing how it ends, knowing that the crinoline cage will be replaced, and then the bustle will follow, and eventually the entire architecture of Victorian female clothing will collapse under the weight of its own unsustainability. These historians are correctly able to identify the coercion in it, but the women inside it are not historians. They are people. They are making their way through a world constructed around specific rules and requirements, using the tools available, doing what is required. Mary Bassett is doing what is required. Lady Winterton is doing what is required. Mrs. Ashmore, with her compressed ribs and her careful carriage, is doing what is required. And all three of them know, in different ways and to different degrees, what is hidden under the hem, the reality underneath the image, the city accumulating in the fabric, the labour that produces the cleanliness, the body that lives inside the stays. They know. They keep going anyway. This is not heroism. It is just what people do in the worlds they are given. November 1865. You're 18, your own room, your own fire. 4 shillings more a month than you made at Harrington Gardens. The work is the same. The morning ritual, the stays, the layers, the 32 buttons, the hem, the cold basin, the laundry, the marks in the fabric. But you're not the same as the girl who stood on the back step of 14 Harrington Gardens 3 days into her position, trying to understand where she was in this enormous and incomprehensible city. You know where you are. You know what the work is. You know what the image costs. And you know something else. Something that you have been learning and unlearning and relearning for 2 years now. The hidden layer is not just the filth. The hidden layer is everything. The cold water and the aching forearms, the years of practice that produce hands that can handle a damaged silk train without making it worse. The knowledge that lives in the hands, how to read a stain, how to move a brush, how to lace a stay to the right tension in the right season. The knowledge that lives in the eyes, what a 5-day hem looks like versus a 3-day hem, what a floor wax stain looks like versus an oil stain, what the inside of a Belgian lace collar looks like after a week, and what it should look like after treatment. This knowledge is not visible. It does not appear in the fashion plates. It is not included in the construction of the image. It is in fact specifically designed to be excluded from the image, because the image's authority depends on appearing effortless. But it is there. It is real. It is earned. It is in its own way the most honest thing in the room. The night deepens. Eaton Square in November, in the small hours when even London's traffic has thinned to a murmur, a cart somewhere distant, a dog, the footsteps of the night watchman at the corner. Your room is warm. The fire is banked down to embers, which you will not touch because they will keep until morning without attention, and there is nothing practical about disturbing them now. The room holds the day's work the way rooms hold work. The smell of the hot iron you used on the linens this afternoon, the slight sweetness of the fuller's earth you used on a morning dress collar, the cold cream smell from the dressing table where you've been laying out tomorrow's things. Tomorrow, the morning routine, the stays, the layers, but that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this, the warmth, the embers, the quiet, the small window looking out onto the square's garden, the trees bare now, the iron railings holding the darkness at the edge of the lamplight. You've been in London for 2 years and 3 months. In those 2 years and 3 months you have helped dress 2 women an average of twice a day. You have washed and treated and pressed and examined approximately 6,000 individual garments in varying states of use. You have spent more hours with your hands in cold water than you have spent sleeping, and you are 18 years old, and you are not done yet, and the work is long, and the city is enormous and indifferent, and you are here. You are here, which is not nothing, which might actually be everything. The bell will ring at 5:30. Tomorrow there will be the stays and the 32 buttons and the hem that will need checking and the cold basin, and the particular ache that laundry puts in your forearms. There will be all of this. But tonight there is just the fire's last warmth, and the quiet of the square, and the accumulated knowledge of 2 years sitting in your hands and your eyes and your aching back. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You have a room with a fire and work that matters and a woman who trusts you with the record of her daily life, which is a form of trust more intimate than most people extend to anyone. That's not nothing. That's enough. Let it be enough. You close your eyes. The city breathes outside. The horses are sleeping in their stables. The women in their houses are sleeping with their hair braided and their stays put away. The hems of tomorrow's dresses are waiting, clean or not yet clean, for morning. Tomorrow there will be the basin and the cold and the 32 buttons. Tomorrow there will be the basin and the cold and the 32 buttons. But not yet. Not yet. The image is sleeping. The reality keeps on. Let the image sleep. Let the labour rest. Let the hands be still. Let the laces be loose. Let the cage fold back to its smallest shape, the way it folds when no one is wearing it. Just wire and tape and the memory of the silhouette it once held. Centuries will pass. The crinoline will go, then the bustle, then the corset itself, then the whole elaborate infrastructure of what Victorian clothing required. The stays will come undone. not from the back, but from history. Women will stop wearing them because they will decide, gradually, collectively, that the 3 inches of waist measurement is not worth the compressed ribs, and this decision will take longer than it should, because decisions about what women wear always take longer than they should, but it will come. The fashion plate will survive in other forms, the magazine, the screen, the advertisement. The image will continue to require work to maintain. The labour will continue to be largely invisible. The hem of the skirt will come up, decade by decade, until the ankle and then the knee are ordinary facts, until the relationship between a woman's clothing and the street beneath her feet is no longer an elaborate negotiation conducted with brushes and cold water and chalk. The crossing sweepers will be gone, replaced by pavements, and eventually by roads that are relatively clean. The horses will give way to engines. The coal smoke will lift, not entirely, not even now, but enough, and people will still get dressed in the morning, will still look at themselves in mirrors, will still perform their version of the image that their world requires, and will still have the hidden layer underneath, the evidence of being alive and in a body, in a city, in weather, in the world. Some things don't change. The gap between the image and the reality, that doesn't change. What changes is who does the work of maintaining it, and whether that work is seen. Tonight, in the small warm room in Eaton Square, in November 1865, with the embers settling and the square quiet outside, the work is done. The hems are clean, or as clean as they will be. The stays are aired, the trains are folded in their tissue. The collars will be white again by morning. Tomorrow it starts again, but for now, let your hands rest. Let the warmth take you down. You are warm enough, rested enough, present enough. The city is managing without you for a few hours. Let it. Let the image sleep and the reality just breathe. Let the cold water wait until morning. Let the buttons be undone. Let the stays be loose. Let everything that has been held in tension by the day's performance release now, into the dark, into the quiet, into the specific rest that belongs to people who have worked hard for it. You have worked hard for it. Take it. Good night.